Essential Task 4.6, we are going to transition into personality testing, transitioning away from intelligence testing, though keeping a lot of the principles from Essential Tasks 4.3 and 4.4. As we will see as we proceed with the remainder of the unit, terminology like reliability and validity will continue onward. I recommend a vertical concept map for this one. It's a little bit of a unique shape in terms of this concept map. So what we see here under personality testing are two categories, trait and then something called psychoanalysis. This essential task entirely involves the trait column. You see 3 boxes here. And then at the bottom, you see technically 5 boxes from left to right, which vertically might seem challenging, but I'll preview some of these boxes for you. There's not an exorbitant amount of text on these 5 boxes at the bottom. As you can see here, they're actually quite short. So this is really 3 boxes on top of each other, 3 pretty average length boxes, and then 5 boxes left to right. But those 5 boxes in and of themselves aren't super long. So I think vertical probably fits the best for this one. If you really like horizontal, it's not impossible that you could hold your piece of paper horizontally for this. But I will allow you to pause the video and copy down the yellow portion of the essential task. The first theory is known as trait perspective or trait theory. If you were to guess what personality testing might look like, this is probably the theory that comes to mind. As you'll see as this unit progresses, there are some unorthodox personality tests out there. That's not the case here with trait perspective. With trait perspective, we're trying to identify some nice, stable, long-lasting, and enduring behavioral patterns and use those as a means of describing personality. So, for example, we're trying to use the word introverted to describe someone who's shy and reserved. We're trying to use the word extroverted to describe somebody who's really talkative and outgoing. We're going to be using a variety of traits in order to identify clear behavioral patterns that are long-lasting and enduring, meaning they're not a one-off. It's not a one day you're really social. It's really a consistent aspect of your behavior. There are a couple things to consider when talking about personality tests that use trait perspective, and that is first the naming. You're not likely going to see the term personality test on the AP exam. It'd be way more common for you to see the term personality inventory because most trait perspective assessments are considered personality inventories, which are self-report questionnaires. Chances are, if you've ever taken an online personality test, to the best of my knowledge, at some point, you were likely asked to take one from guidance, probably the Myers-Briggs. If you've taken the leadership course at Aponequid, you've definitely taken a personality inventory with the Myers-Briggs. Personality inventories are self-report questionnaires. They can be true or false, rate on a 1 to 5 scale, place an X for whatever applies. They are by far and away the most common type of personality test that exists. The screenshot there at the bottom is an example of some of the questions that you could encounter on a personality inventory. I really like to be the center of attention. I am no better or worse than most people. Everybody likes to hear my stories. Questions like that are what you would anticipate on these self-report questionnaires. An important key here is it's self-report. You're responding as truthfully as possible. You're not being evaluated by a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist, nothing like that. You are self-reporting your results. These are designed to be what we call objective, meaning your results are going to be read by a computer, or at least there's going to be a predetermined scoring system that's going to produce your result. So regardless of the answers that you put in, they're just going to be thrown into a computer, and that computer is going to read your results, and you're going to get talkative, or you're going to get shy, or whatever the personality characteristics happen to be. That might not seem like an important point, but as the unit progresses, we're going to be talking about personality theories and personality tests that are not objective, that are evaluated by the test administrator, that are very subjective, meaning 2 different test administrators might evaluate your results differently. That is not the case with personality inventories. Your results are read by a computer. There's a predetermined formula. Whatever it is that you respond to, your results are going to be predetermined. There's no subjectivity whatsoever. As a mnemonic, when I look at the term personality inventory, I use the word inventory and I connect that with the word object in objective. Objective means there's no gray area. It's read by a computer. It's predetermined. Whatever your responses are read by an outside source. Or at least if it is evaluated by a person, they're using a very strict formula. There's no interpretation necessary. I think of the word inventory and I think the word object. Inventories, like the ones that you might have at your job, are probably filled with a bunch of objects. So I use the word inventory and object. The remainder of this concept map is the third box down, which is to identify what's called the big 5 factors, and then proceed left to right through those 5 boxes at the bottom, discussing the 5 factors. McRae and Costa's name are not likely to appear on the AP exam, so we'll give them a small letter C. However, it's very likely that the big 5 factors or the big 5 personality traits appear on the AP exam. They are almost always an FRQ or multiple choice question. And it's probably because it's the most commonly used personality inventory, meaning there are other ways of evaluating personality in terms of this trait characteristic notion, but the big 5 is by far the most common. And it's the most common for a few different reasons. One is that research has shown that the big 5 personality traits that we're about to talk about in just a moment are fairly stable in middle adulthood, meaning once you reach adulthood, you're not suddenly going to shift in one direction regarding these 5 traits. If you've been extroverted, which is really outgoing and talkative your whole life, and you've reached middle adulthood and you're still talkative, that's not suddenly going to change as you age. You're probably going to remain extroverted for the remainder of your life. That's really valuable because one of the big benefits of personality, of the trait theory that we're talking about, is its stability. We want to be able to say, this person is talkative, that's not going to change, this is a clearly defined behavioral pattern. And the big 5 factors allow you to do that. These are also fairly culturally consistent, meaning these translate regardless of cultural background, which makes this specific assessment even more valuable. The next that it is heritable, meaning we have found evidence to suggest that there is a genetic influence in these big 5 factors. So continuing on with extroverted, which again is really talkative and outgoing, there is some degree of evidence to believe that if you're really talkative and outgoing, it's because you inherited it from your parents. That's one of the big benefits of the big 5, is that we've shown that there is a high degree of heritability with some of these big 5 factors. Meaning if you yourself are really talkative, there's a reasonable chance that you could pass that on to your children. The final one is that this does a decent job predicting future behaviors. One of the ones that we're going to talk about in just a moment is called conscientiousness, which is a term that we use to describe people who are really disciplined, really organized, maintain a good schedule, great at planning. Well, individuals who score high on the conscientious or conscientiousness scale tend to earn better grades. So in addition to being stable, in addition to indicating some degree of heritability, the big 5 factors also does a great job predicting future behaviors through some of those types of correlations. But we'll talk about the big 5. I like to visualize the big 5 with a canoe because the first letter in each of the words spells the word canoe. So you might even draw a little silly quick canoe at the bottom of your piece of paper to help remind you of the big 5. You can also spell the word ocean, but the ocean is a little bit harder to draw, so I use canoe, and I will use canoe in this order, but that also spells the word ocean. The way these slides work, I have the term at the top, and then I have this high or low scale. It's important that you include that high or low scale so that you know what you're copying down. If you do not copy down the high or low scale, you might see these 4 terms next to each other and question why they're a bit of an opposite. The first is the big 5 trait of conscientiousness, and that's important. If this is an FRQ bullet, that's how you're going to see it. Big 5 trait of, and then the variable. Do not make a common mistake, which is see the term big 5 trait of and think that they're asking you to write about all 5 of them. That would never, ever be the case. They always ask you to write about only one of them. For whatever reason, when students see the word conscientiousness, they think it's a different word, like conscience. And they think that they're being asked to write about all 5 of them, which makes them waste way too much time writing the FRQ bullet. Do not fall into that trap. Big 5 trait of conscientiousness requires you only to write about this. Having a high degree of conscientiousness means you're really organized and disciplined. You can keep a schedule. You can plan things out. You can allot time for studying. This can be really beneficial at work. This can be certainly beneficial in school. Somebody that has a really organized AP Psych binder, a really organized planner, a really organized schedule, always allots time to study and do their homework. That would be somebody who's really conscientious. The other is somebody that has low conscientiousness, which might be a little bit more impulsive or disorganized. I mean, it's not the end all be all. You can still certainly succeed academically if you're disorganized. But for the most part, conscientiousness is a desirable Big Five trait because, as we alluded to a moment ago, it does correlate to strong school performance. The letter A stands for agreeableness. Individuals that score high on the agreeableness scale tend to be really great at human interaction. They can come across as trusting. They are trusting of others, and they can be particularly helpful. It'd be really desirable to exhibit agreeableness in group projects or as a coworker. The other end of the spectrum is someone who's a little bit more uncooperative and suspicious, always questioning the motives of other people, always questioning the ability of other people, not being willing to relinquish control of group projects or group assignments. The third is the letter N. The letter N stands for neurotic or neuroticism. Individuals who score high on the neurotic scale tend to be prone to stress and really anxious. And you can kind of think about that in the context of someone who's highly neurotic might make a pretty common mistake and then start to lash out at other people or start to overanalyze that mistake. And next thing you know, it's breaking their train of thought. And next thing you know, they're preparing for an exam that they're really well prepared for, or taking an exam they're really well prepared for. But one question's a little off. They get a little bit confused. And next thing you know, their whole train of thought's all over the place. That would be somebody who's highly neurotic. The other end of the spectrum is someone who's just a little bit more stable. I don't want to use emotionally stable to make it seem like if you have high neuroticism, that it's the end all be all. But somebody who can see that confusing question on a test, realize that they might get it wrong, but not lose focus. Generally speaking, high neuroticism is not super desirable, at least in the context of the FRQs that you're going to see. It's not inconceivable that you see a question that asks, how will the Big Five trait of neuroticism affect somebody on a math test or a driving test? If that's the case, if you're going to write about the high end of this, it makes way more sense to talk about this as a negative. Talk about somebody who got a little bit too nervous, a little bit too psyched out, started to make mistakes that they wouldn't otherwise have been making. That's how I would approach a bullet on this one. The O stands for openness. Somebody that scores high on the openness scale would be somebody who's really creative and imaginative, willing to come up with new ideas or try new things. You know somebody who's really willing to try just about any type of food, willing to do just about anything. That would be somebody who's really high on the openness scale. The low end is totally fine too. Somebody who's very practical and conventional. Some people have specific restaurants that they like, and not only that, specific dishes at specific restaurants, and they just sort of keep it to that. They don't veer off. They don't necessarily try new things, which is totally fine. They know what works. They know what they like, and they just rinse and repeat. Somebody who's high on this might go to a restaurant and say, well, I've been here 10 times. I'm going to now get my 10th different dish. I just want to try everything. So you can see both ends of the spectrum when you're talking about openness. The last one, we actually alluded to this several times throughout the concept map, is extroversion or extroverted. High-end extroversion would look like somebody who is really social and talkative and fun-loving, somebody who could really be the center of attention, someone who can really crush a job interview because they're just in and of themselves really personable and really talkative. The other end of the spectrum, which is totally fine, is somebody who's a little bit more reserved, somebody who looks at a Saturday night or a Friday night and looks at it as an opportunity to rest and relax. Not to say that they're unwilling to go out, but if they do choose to go out, they would much rather do something small with a few close friends than do something really over the top, like go to this big party, go to somewhere to go dancing. That's how this would be reflected.